what's up, folks? Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers. Pleased to be joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Bobby Burton, as well as the newest member of the On Texas Football family. The man needs no introduction, our own Jeff Howe. And this is our spring ball positional breakdowns. We break down every position. And of course, we're going to start with the position that gets the most attention, the quarterback position. And we'll get to it here. First, before we talk about the quarterbacks, let me tell you about our sponsor, tackleaddict.com. Oh, yeah, tackleaddict.com. Get your tackle on. That's right, tackleaddict.com, 409-698-9370. I'll give you a special message from our friends at tackleaddict.com. But thank you to them for sponsoring our On Texas spring football positional breakdowns. All right. Let's get to the quarterbacks here, guys. And man, the times, I would say 40 acres, times are good at the quarterback position, and the future is bright at the quarterback position. Arch Manning, of course, will take over as the starter after Quinn Ewers. And the expectations for Arch Manning are probably higher, and I played with Chris Sims, by the way, higher than they've ever been for any quarterback, especially a high-profile celebrity quarterback like Arch Manning.
I mean, where do you even start, Rod? That's what I would say. I mean, where do we even start with what might be his expectations? Because, look, Quinn Ewers was ranked as one of the greatest high school quarterbacks of all time, right, coming out. Now, he accelerated his graduation year by 1 year, and so I think he had some catching up to do maturity-wise. Mm-hmm. But Arch Manning, number one ranked player in the country by most services. I think he was ranked as low as 2. And then we've seen him already play a few games. And what we've seen has been very tantalizing, I think is the best way to put it. I'm not saying he's been perfect in those games, but my goodness, I mean, he has been one of those guys that, as you look at it, already passed for almost 1,000 yards. And that's other than a couple of games he started, it's been mostly mop-up duty, 9 passing touchdowns, 4 rushing touchdowns. I mean, everything about him tells us that he's going to have a strong year. You know, my question is, when you look at him, how does it compare? What are your expectations for Arch this year? What he needs to do this spring? I mean, I'm a little bit. You said Texas is, got a great situation at quarterback, Rod, and I just couldn't agree more. I think it's terrific.
Jeff, your thoughts on overall the expectations, because we'll get into, I think, kind of specifically some more specificity about numbers. But what are your thoughts overall? I mean, you've seen a lot of football here, but there's nothing like the hype that we've seen for Arch Manning.
No, and I just thinking about it, was obviously you mentioned you were roommates with Chris Sims, good friends with Chris Sims. In the state of Texas, there was buzz about Vince Young, Garrett Gilbert, but this is different. This is totally different, and I haven't seen anything like this. My expectations for Arch, I think it to kind of try to see the forest through the trees a little bit. You can make the case right now Arch Manning is the second best quarterback in the SEC entering 2025. I just think it's an interesting year for quarterbacks in the league. Garrett Nussmeier would probably be one. If you look at proven commodities, you'd have to talk about Diego Pavia at Vanderbilt, Lenore Sellers at South Carolina. But they're different guys to me, Rod. Lenore Sellers reminds me a lot of a guy you played against in college. Reminds me of Brad Smith at Missouri. I don't know if his future in the NFL is at quarterback, but his future is in the NFL somewhere. He's just a dynamic athlete at the position. And then you've got a guy like DJ Lagway at Florida and Arch are kind of in the same boat, that what we've seen, Bobby used the term perfectly. It's been tantalizing. Like, it's been, oh my gosh, like this guy could be big. We just haven't seen enough of it extrapolated over a whole year. So I think when you break it down, Arch Manning could be the second best quarterback in the SEC and a pretty good year for quarterbacks in the league. So that's how I'm looking at it. I'm expecting Arch to be in that, at the very least, where I set the bar, be in that all SEC mix, which if he is, Texas is probably back in Atlanta playing for a conference championship.
I agree with you on that. That's a good point. It's a good place to start. All SEC caliber season for Arch. And that means if you're all SEC caliber, because you may not make, it's only 2 quarterbacks that are going to make all SEC team. And I don't know if they did a third team, but usually just 2. That means at least you're in the top 4 quarterbacks around there. Was Quinn among the top 4 quarterbacks in the SEC?
At the end of the day, probably. I mean,
Yeah.
he was one of the, I think that he was one of the 4 most predictably decent or good quarterbacks in the SEC. Last year wasn't a great quarterback year in the SEC, in my opinion. There was no, hey, this guy's going to be a number 1 pick. I mean, there wasn't those kind of guys. I think the most impressive guys in the SEC last year were actually young guys. Derek Lagway was extraordinarily impressive in limited time. Lenora Sellers, who Jeff mentioned, extremely impressive, but had an injury that he overcame and got better as the season went on. Those guys, Nico Iamaleava, I think he reminds me a lot of Quinn in one way. Kind of sometimes looks really good, and sometimes it looks like the wheels fall off, right? Yep. And so I do think that another name to mention and keep in mind is Taylon Green up at Arkansas. If he gets better, another year under Bobby Petrino. But I do think that, to your point, is all SEC caliber a possibility coming out of this? Yes. I think that's a fair assessment with Arch, in my opinion. Not necessarily first team, by the way, just in the conversation.
With 2 years sitting, obviously, and learning the Sark system, and usually when quarterbacks have sat here at Texas, that's been a good sign. Guys who have kind of sat and had time to learn a system or just have time to mature as a QB. I think that also is kind of pushing some of the expectations, some of the growing pains you usually associate with a guy who is new to a system. I don't think those are excuses for Arch next season, because he knows the system really well. Now for Quinn, it was his 3rd year starting in the system. It'll be his 1st year starting in the system. So let's talk about, that and what the numbers could be for a guy like Arch. 1st year starting in the system after sitting. Now we got to take into account the weapons around him, take into account his style of play as well, which is a conversation that I want to get into here. But Bobby, what would your numbers wise? We're talking about completion percentage. We're talking about overall yards. What would be some of the touchdowns to interceptions? What would be some of the numbers in the range of numbers we should be looking at for a guy like Arch to meet expectations next season?
I think he did a smart thing and just if you throw out Quinn's 1st year as a starter at Texas, okay, where he just wasn't ready. He was forced into action, in my opinion, in that year, right? He did the best he could with it. Texas ended up 8-5, et cetera, right? But he was forced into action. He was a 58% passer that year, okay? 2,177 yards, 15 TDs, 6 interceptions, okay? No great shakes. His 2nd year, which is kind of where I think Arch would be, if we're starting to talk about this conversation. Quinn was 272 of 394, completed 69% of his passes for 3,479 yards, 22 TDs, 6 interceptions. That ended up being his best statistical year at Texas. Actually, was 2023, not 2024. Arch last year in mop-up duty, 61 of 90 for 939 with a 67.8% completion ratio. I think if you're looking at what we could expect reasonably from Arch this year is somewhere in that 65 to 70% window, probably closer to 65%, because that we all know that those numbers that he had early in the season were against UTSA.
Yep.
Those type of opponents where he kind of picked up and matched those guys. If you take 65% and he tosses the ball 400 times, that's going to be roughly 260 completions for 65% percentage. The question I have, and this is really where I want to talk to you guys about, is the change. What's the yardage per completion? Okay. And what are the TDs to interception ratio for Arch? Because my problem with Quinn in 2024 was turnovers. Through 12 picks, had 5 turnovers and fumbles. He lost 5 fumbles.
Mm-hmm.
That he had 17 turnovers in 14 games. That's a lot. And so it's not just about completion percentage. Quinn's yardage per reception last year, 11.8, but it was only 7.8 per reception or per attempt. So I'll throw it out to you guys. Jeff, what are you thinking on as far as yardage that you would expect Arch to have?
I would want him to be closer where Quinn was in 2023, 8.8 yards per attempt, 12.8 yards per catch. I do think we're going to see, and think about Quinn in 2023. I think the vertical passing game, when they went to it, I think it was better for two reasons. One, you had Xavier Worthy, who had two functional hands as opposed to one, and you brought in A.D. Mitchell. You also had Jatavian Sanders, when healthy, could stretch the field. So, yeah, you were able – your vertical game was a lot more prolific in 23 than it was in 24. I'm with you, Bobby, the turnovers. And that's the thing that I'm interested to see the difference from Quinn to Arch. How does Arch process the decisions he makes, especially decisions in the red area where the field's compressed and things move a little bit faster and you've got to react a little faster? How does that change? And does Arch's decision-making, does that help your red zone numbers? Rod, I know you and I have talked a lot about red zone numbers and red zone production. I wonder if Arch's decision-making, if that and his ability to process, if that can help you, not even in the high red area. I'm talking about with a 20 and in. So I would like for him, Bobby, I'm in my mind between 25 and 30 touchdown passes in that range. And I'm thinking 6 or fewer interceptions, because a fumble here or there can happen. And if you have that kind of season, if you're, right around 30 touchdowns, 6 or fewer interceptions, with close to, 70% completion rate, like we're talking about, now you're starting to get into Colt McCoy 2008 territory. And if you get that kind of year from Arch, again, I think Texas is in Atlanta playing for an SEC championship.
Yep. I think you made a great point about the offense changing. I think naturally Arch, he prefers the vertical deep shots down the field. We saw that in a little bit of sample size that we got this past season. So I think you will get more of the deep ball. I think he's better at converting those deep shots downfield. So I think that element of the offense will come back. And also, I think he'll be able to extend plays and the scramble drill will come back. That's something Sam Ehlinger, I think, did really well. I don't know if they execute the scramble drill as well as they should have, considering he scrambled as much as any quarterback in the country. But the scramble drill is something I think they got to get really good at, because Sark's not going to encourage him to run. All right. Sark's going to encourage him to extend the play, run to throw. Now, I do think Arch is going to scramble a lot more than probably Sark's comfortable with, which is a good thing. That's an element we have not had in the offense. I think Quinn scrambled 19 times all last season. And he actually averaged around 7.5 yards per rush on scramble. Scramble is the most effective, efficient play right now in football at the college or the pro level, guys, to scramble. Because it's a breakdown, and you can't account for it as a defensive coordinator. And Arch averages almost 12 yards per scramble. He's going to be great in the scramble. He's going to be great in the scramble drill. That's going to really annoy opposing defensive coordinators. And I think, Jeff, it's going to help them also in the red zone, because they're going to have to account for that when that field is restricted, that he just may take off. And I think it'll help them a little bit with the +1 element. Defenses having to have to defend it, have to account for it. I should say they may not use it, but you'll have to account for it.
Yeah, you have to respect the quarterback run now.
I respect the quarterback run game. Yeah,
if you don't, if you give Quinn, just nothing but grass in front of him in a read option situation, that'll probably be a 15, maybe a 20-yard gain. If you give Arch that could be 60, 70 yards and out the gate. So that's the difference to me between the two. I think in terms of changing the offense, Rod, I think it's going to have to force Sark to change a little bit, because you're going to have to incorporate the quarterback run game element. And when you talk about the scramble, look no further than the first 2 CFP games Texas played against Cade Klubnik and against Sam Levitt. More so against Klubnik, because there were times where you can go back and watch the game and say the front was right, the coverage was right, it was executed right, PK was right, everybody did their job. But because Cade Klubnik, his escapability, it made you wrong. It made your exact right call wrong. So that's what that element does. And, Texas hasn't had that in a minute. Like you said, they had it with Sam Ehlinger, but I think we can agree it's going to be a different type of scrambler between Arch and Sam. You know, I don't see Arch, Bobby, putting his head down and trying to bowl over a safety in the open field. He's gonna try to make that guy miss and try to rip off the big yardage. So I'm intrigued to see how Arch's presence forces Sark to change his look at the offense, knowing, hey, I've got to take advantage of this run dynamic we've got with Arch.
All right, let's thank our friends over at Tackle Addict before we move on discussing the quarterbacks here. Are you an avid fisherman who always is searching for the right supplies? Do yourself a favor and check out tackleaddict.com, owned and operated by former lifetime Longhorn Brian Robeson, former Longhorn baseball great as well, Brandon Belt. Tackle Addict has everything you need for the best in today's fishing equipment. Tackle Addict is for the everyday fisherman and serious pros alike. Get their products shipped to you directly from the shores of Lake Sam Rayburn. That's Tackle Addict, ADDICT.com. And my man Brian and Brandon, legendary lifetime Longhorns, they say hook them. And that's tackleaddict.com. We really appreciate them sponsoring our own Texas football positional breakdowns here.
Hey, Rod. Rod, I have one more thing I wanted to add in here real quick before we move, because I know we want to talk about the room as a whole, because we spend so much time. You know, last year, 11.84 yards per completion for Quinn Ewers. That's down almost a full yard from the prior year. Now, I think Adonai Mitchell and Xavier Worthy had something to do with it. I really do. I mean, they explosive, right? Tandem. But Arch last year in limited number of attempts, roughly a quarter of what Quinn had, he averaged 15.4 yards per completion. So if Arch goes 260 for 400 and hits that 65% range, you're talking about a guy that's going to get maybe 3,700 yards, 3,800 yards passing. And so to go back to what y'all said, I think it comes down to turnovers a little bit.
Yeah.
And how he manages that aspect of this, because 17 turnovers, if you would have told me Quinn Ewers was going to have 17 turnovers in the preseason, I don't think Texas is in the college football playoffs. I don't think they're in the college SEC championship game. I think there's no way you tell me he has 17 turnovers, 12 interceptions, five fumbles. And I want to say this, all those 5 fumbles came from conference play on. I mean, so those were in conference. So if Arch can continue to be fairly aggressive downfield while limiting turnovers, that's when I think y'all hit the nail on the head. Those numbers make sense. Texas getting into the SEC championship, playing in the college football playoff. I think that is the sneaky number. Maybe Texas got a little lucky, I think, in 2024 when it comes to getting by with that many turnovers from its quarterback.
Because the defense. Your defense was that good. Your defense was so good. We never had to really pay the price for those costly turnovers. Because the
sudden change defense in particular, right? Yep. I mean, and on the goal line. And
Bobby, I'll back you up on this real quick. Colt McCoy, exactly what you're talking about. You go from 08 to 09, goes from 76.7, that insane year where he should have won the Heisman, to 70.6. Even for Colt, for everybody else, you'd be thrilled with that. For Colt, it was a drop, though. About 300 fewer passing yards, 7 fewer passing touchdowns. Yards per attempt go down from 8.9 to 7.5. Yards per completion go down from 11.6 to 10.6. What was the difference? Only 8 picks in 2008. He threw 12 in 2009. So even 4 more turnovers for a guy like Colt, who was deadly accurate, that made a ton of difference.
And the crazy thing is, Quinn, overall, the offense and the structure of it, it was built to minimize the risk. Because you were throwing a lot of short, underneath, quick throws. You're going to have Arch going deeper into progressions and throwing more vertical shots downfield. So even more to Bobby's point, being able to do that by minimizing the risk is going to be huge, because that's where a lot of Quinn's turnovers came when he was actually pushing the football down the field. But a lot, as we know, Quinn's kind of his X-Men ability is his accuracy and his timing and layering the football on those quick throws, and the ones where he's kind of, the ones where he's off platform and can still deliver the ball really, really well on on time for the yak yardage, right? On time and on target for the yak yardage. That's something actually Arch probably will struggle a little with early. I think Arch will be better with the vertical shots, intermediate to vertical shots. I think where he might struggle is those quick underneath throws from off platform, all types of weird angles. And Quinn was amazing at that. Quinn wasn't so great at the deeper stuff downfield. I think that's natural. I think getting through progressions is something Arch does naturally really well. Go look at his time to throw. He's held it on to the ball 2.7 seconds time to throw, 3.1 seconds his average time to throw. For Quinn, 2.5, 2.5, 2.4. It's out. He's on schedule. But Arch ain't always on schedule because Arch wants to get to the progressions to get downfield. It's going to be really interesting to see how they minimize that risk. Because for Quinn, he shouldn't have had so many turnovers because there's not a lot of risk elements in that offense with him.
Arch is going to have to learn to check it down more.
Yeah, he's throwing it. Yeah, because he's throwing it deep 21% of the time, Bobby. Quinn throws it deep 12% of the time last year, so it's a big difference. So you're right. He's got to learn how to check it down. Take what the defense is giving you. Let's talk about the quarterback position overall, just real quick before we end this thing, guys. We know, I'm knocking on wood here, but I think there have been 9 times, I believe, in the last 30 years where a quarterback has started and finished every game at Texas and not have to deal with either a competition issue, performance issue, or an injury issue. So that is tough. Like that's a tough thing to do. The backup Trey Owens. Will there be a competition between Trey Owens and KJ Lacey for the backup position? Because if there is, let me tell you right now, I think Trey Owens wins that hands down. I got faith in Trey Owens.
I think there should be. I mean, I know I liked what I saw from Trey Owens last spring. I'm a Trey Owens fan, but at the end of the day, if KJ Lacey's better, then hey, it was an open competition for that backup spot when Arch came in, with Arch and Malik having to battle it out. Oh, yeah. So I don't see why Sark and AJ Milwee wouldn't do the same, even though, like I said, I love Trey Owens. I'll go back. He had a tremendous senior year at Cy-Fair playing for a guy that I've known for a long time. I think one of the best high school coaches in the state, Jeff Miller. You look at Trey's touchdowns, what he did in the run game. Bobby, you know this, and Rod, you guys know this, both haven't been around Houston high school football as long as you have. You knock Katie out of the playoffs in the second round, you're doing something right. So I just think the growth Trey Owens has shown, I think that was a great eval by Sark and AJ Milwee. So I'm excited to see what he can do. But if KJ Lacey's the better man, then he's the better man.
I agree with that. I mean, I do think that they should have a competition. I think that Trey Owens will win that competition, to Rod's point, right? And the other thing about Trey Owens, and we saw this in last year's spring game, he's got a little fearlessness to him.
Yeah, he does.
He's got a little bit of that. Now, the question I have is, can he make some of those short, quick throws that Sark's offense relies on? Because Trey is not necessarily a fleet-footed quarterback. He's more of a Quinn Ewers type mover, but we'll see if he actually has the quickness, the arm quickness that Quinn has. KJ Lacey, I will say this. Talking with Craig Hobart, who leads the ESPN recruiting rankings, he brought something up this morning in the Coffee and Football edition that was really interesting about KJ Lacey. First of all, he compared him, Rod and Jeff, to Dylan Gabriel. That was his comp.
Wow.
So that's an interesting comp. That means he's a slight build guy that throws the ball on time, can really, be accurate, et cetera. That was number one. Number two is KJ Lacey, as a junior in high school and a sophomore, had Ryan Williams, the Alabama receiver, as his key receiver. He said that KJ Lacey's stats as a senior without Ryan Williams were virtually identical to what they were when he was a junior.
Wow.
And so I think what Texas is getting in KJ Lacey is probably a little bit better thrower of the football than people realize. But I also think that Trey Owens is a future NFL quarterback. Now,
ooh,
I feel pretty strongly about that because he's got the size. He's got a better arm than Arch Manning.
Oh, he's got a cannon.
Yeah, and so I feel like Rod, you started this video saying that Texas kind of had an embarrassment of riches at that quarterback position. And it starts at the top. There's no doubt about that with Arch Manning. But this is a talented QB room, in my opinion.
Yep, I agree with you. And KJ Lacey, he's a playmaker. And I just love watching him at the quarterback. He's a playmaker. He's got great instincts. Throws the ball really well on the run. That's one of the things he does really well, just on the run. And you think he's a guy that's he is a dual threat and is mobile, but he's a playmaker and he likes to play from the pocket and he looks to throw first.
Yep.
So I like his game, and he's not a typical Sark quarterback. So Sark is exploring kind of a very diverse, group of quarterbacks now. It seems like that room is not just cookie cutter. Right, where every quarterback kind of looks the same. Very different, varying skill sets. I think they all have commonalities, but varying skill sets there. Let you know that Sark's thinking outside the box when it comes to a lot of these QBs. All right. Thank you very much to our friends at Tackle Addict, tackleaddict.com, for sponsoring our own Texas football positional preview and breakdown. We'll be back, of course, to preview the rest of the offensive positions, running back, O-line, tight end, wide receiver, and then we'll jump to the defensive side of things as well. Thank you very much, Bobby. Appreciate all of the knowledge. Jeff, thank you for your time and expertise as well. And thank you to all of you guys out there for watching and for listening. And until next time, hook 'em horns.
Hook 'em.